Hello, my name is Russell Myers. Welcome to Issues Unite. I keep hearing people say that there is a stalemate in the Ukraine conflict. Yes, my hair is wet again. Uh, no, there is no stalemate. Uh, like it or not, Russia is winning in Ukraine. Let me start, first of all, with last year. Last year, if you remember, Russia was attacking energy distribution centers. Most Ukrainian trains operate on electricity. So, what this managed to do was to slow the flow of Ukrainian men and equipment to the front lines. This was during the time that Russia had called up 300,000 men, but they wanted to train those men extensively. They spent months training these men. But that's not all that Russia was doing at that time. Uh, so at that time, they were also building defenses, which have been reported in the New York Times. Let me go first to this piece from the New York Times that shows, where did it go? All right, here is uh, their report on the structure of these, uh, defenses that Russia has built. You've got these anti-vehicle trenches. These are so deep and so wide that tanks, armored vehicles cannot cross them. And then you've got a large berm, which infantry would have to go over, exposing them. Then you got dragon's teeth. These are concrete structures, pyramid shaped, that are about 4 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet tall, and they will stop tanks. The U.S. Army uses the same things. So this will also stop tanks. They cannot go through them or over them. Then you've got these, you got sandbags, you've got trenches, and you got pillboxes for ground troops to be able to fire from with protection. So, and it's not just one line of defense. This is from the BBC, and this shows some of the lines of defense during the time that they were attacking. Russia was attacking the energy distribution centers. They were building these lines of defense, and this is actually not all that good of a depiction, but there are multiple lines of defenses in all up through here, and in southern Russia and the Belgorod region. So this gives you an idea of what Russia was doing during that time. By slowing the flow of men and equipment, that gave them time to train their people with the forces that they had at the front line. And Russia, the people that say that there is a stalemate only look at the front lines, at where the front lines are. That is not, Russia is fighting a non-standard form of warfare. They are fighting a war of attrition. That's the purpose of these defenses. They intend to keep the fighting very, very close to that one line. But Ukraine is forced to keep sending men and equipment up to that front line where Russia has the upper hand. They have their artillery, they have their defenses, etc. There comes in front of the Russian defenses, they have what they call the defense zone. And this is where all of the fighting is taking place. Ukraine has not made it to the first line of defense. Like I said, Russia has like 3 lines of defense. But they haven't made it to the first line of defense as yet. Now, these lines of defense are somewhat dynamic. One side takes territory a couple of kilometers, one direction or another, one day, and then it gets taken back by the other side the next day. But on balance, Ukraine has been losing more territory than they have been gaining. The Russians are, at this point, advancing in certain areas. Ukraine keeps on trying to punch through the Russian defenses, but it keeps on failing. In the process, Russia stays in control of where the fighting is taking place. And as a result, both sides are definitely losing men and equipment. But again, on balance, Ukraine is losing far more than the Russian forces are losing. That's why they claim that there's a stalemate. They keep on rushing, Ukraine keeps on pushing more men and equipment in. It gets destroyed. They have to send in more. And I'll say again, I think the method, the strategy, the tactics that Ukraine is using are foolish. If you got the forces to send wave after wave, day after day in the same area, why didn't you just send them all at once and overwhelm the Russian defenses? That would make a lot more sense. But they're not doing that. They just keep on sending men and equipment into these areas over and over that they know are death traps. This is Ukraine killing their own people. They know that these are death traps, but they keep on doing it, just like they did in Bakhmut. But they learned nothing from Bakhmut. They had this massive, they said they had amassed 80,000 troops outside of Bakhmut, but those 80,000 just stayed outside of Bakhmut. And people ask why Russia doesn't destroy these bridges and so forth leading to eastern Ukraine. They don't want to. They want these troops coming to eastern Ukraine to fight at the front line that Russia has defined and remains in control of. That's what they want. So you keep on sending them, and sending them. And again, Russia remains in control. So, another thing is that at this front line, Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to do major repairs on damaged equipment that they are able to recover. They have to ship that equipment back to Poland, 1,000 kilometers away. So they have to transport the damaged equipment over to Poland, repair the equipment, and then transported 1,000 kilometers back to the front lines. And every time that a crew gets, injured or killed, then you have to train an entire new crew for that equipment. And this just keeps happening over and over again. It is expensive, it is time consuming, it limits the amount of equipment that is on the front line at any given time. Meanwhile, Ukraine has no capacity at this point for military production, while Russia has continued increasing their production and developing new technologies. They now have announced that they've increased production so much that they have a shortage of trained technicians of 18,000 people. But of course, they're in the process of hiring and training, cross-training from other areas into these positions and paying them extremely well. That the collective West, all of NATO, including the U.S., said that they intend to increase artillery round production to 2 million rounds a year by 2025. And yet Russia has a production capacity of 2.5 million shells right now. By 2025, they'll probably be producing 4 million shells a year. So they will always stay ahead. The United States has not produced an M1 tank since 2012. Meanwhile, Russia is producing over 1,000 tanks per year, brand new ones. And that's not counting how many upgraded older tanks that they are putting in, per month. And now I thought I'd pause that. And so it didn't work. So Biden admitted that the reason that the United States sent cluster munitions, banned in 120 plus countries, to Ukraine is because we ran out of standard artillery shells that we could send to Ukraine. But I've already covered the fact that cluster munitions are ineffective against armored vehicles. And the Russians will adapt their tactics to compensate for the use of cluster munitions against personnel. You spread out your personnel more. You use fewer ground troops. You spread out your ground troops further. And even if a cluster munition is dropped, it takes out fewer people. You put covers over your trenches, which they've been doing more and more of. It hits that heavy cover, and that cluster munition doesn't damage, doesn't harm people as much. And Russia has been responding as well, using a limited amount of cluster munitions as a response, which they were not using until Ukraine started using them. Much as the West likes to claim that Russia was using them, they were not. Otherwise, the ground forces in Bakhmut and so forth, which was nearly all ground troops, they would have been losing them in much higher numbers. So, no, there is no stalemate. Russia's fighting a war of attrition. That Ukraine has had to have multiple rounds of, recruitment by force, conscription by force. We've seen the videos of people being dragged off the street and thrown into vans to send them to the front lines. We've seen this happening. We know this is happening. And Russia has had one round of conscription, but they have reportedly over 1,000 men signing up for contracts to fight in Ukraine every single day. They're recruiting at least a battalion or 2 battalions per day, while Ukraine is losing at least 2 battalions per day, 600, 700, 1,000 men per day. They will report on how many, you'll hear reports about 15 armored personnel carriers taken out. Well, that's a personnel carrier. Each one of those personnel carriers carries 8 to 10 infantrymen. So when you take out 15 of them, multiply that. You're talking over 100 men for those, up to 150 men taken out of combat, injured or killed. When you take out all of those armored personnel carriers, you're taking out the personnel in the personnel carrier. For every tank that's taken out, that is destroyed, there's at least 4, there are 4 people. On average, the tanks that they are using has a crew of 4. You're taking out 4. You take out 10 tanks, you've also taken out 40 trained people that you have to replace the tank. You have to train more people to operate any replacements, if you have any replacements. I'll say it again. I am not in favor of Russia, although I'm not in favor of Ukraine. This war has been going on since 2014, as Ukraine was attacking the Donbass. This has been going on since 2014, not since February of last year. What I am in favor of is peace talks. Stop the fighting, sit down and talk. Yes, Ukraine will have to give up territory that is occupied by people that they didn't want to be part of their country. So, stop. Give yourself a future. Stop killing your own people. Russia is not going to stop until there are peace talks. And they have made it clear from the very beginning that they wanted peace talks. They wanted peace talks before this began. They wanted the Minsk agreements honored, which were signed in 2014 and 2015 by Ukraine. They tried for all those years to get Ukraine to honor the Minsk agreements. Last March, they had peace talks. Ukraine made certain agreements, and then they refused to honor them. There is no reason that Russia really should honor any agreement or believe that Ukraine is going to honor any agreement that Ukraine comes to. So the goal is demilitarization of Ukraine, which they are very close to achieving at this point. It doesn't matter how many weapons you send when there's nobody to operate the weapons. And this is an entire culture that is being destroyed. You're taking away any future that Ukraine has by destroying an entire generation. So no, there's no stalemate. Stop saying that. That is a lie. There is no stalemate. All right, share this video. Talk about these subjects. If you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help expand this channel and my presidential campaign, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a good day.